Thank you so much, Muzzammil, for sitting here with me today to talk about Kashmir, Palestine. Of course, I'd like to talk to you about Kashmir and Palestine, and also what you've referred to as Muslim identity. And I suppose to begin the discussion in earnest, perhaps you might describe how you feel the focus on Kashmir is globally right now.
Well, thank you for hosting me. With the Palestinian cause, it's incredible that, especially this time round, we've always known it, but we've never really needed the international world in terms of sovereign states and the United Nations and global powers to actually talk about Kashmir, talk about Palestine, my mistake. You've seen the exponential rise, particularly in the age of social media, of how the common people have come forward drastically on multiple platforms, not just advocating for the Palestinian cause, but most importantly, completely trashing whatever the agenda of the Zionists, particularly the false information, the propaganda, the misinformation that they've been pushing out into the different various forms of media, be it social media or mainstream media. The speed at which the Zionists have been publishing that information, twice as fast that information has been dismissed or debunked by the public, not by different governments, not by NGOs, not by organizations, but individuals, the public, general public who have access to the information out there. It's unprecedented. So the Palestinian cause as it is today is probably stronger than it's ever been. Granted, for whatever reason people want to talk about, it's on the back of violence or whatnot. But the violence didn't start as, this is the common theme that everybody says, which is true, that it didn't start 15, 16, 17 months ago. It's been going on for so many years. But the fact that it's now captured the imagination of a new audience as well, particularly the right wing. Look, we've always known that the socialists and the lefts have always been sensitive to the Palestinian cause, but the far right have become as sensitive, if not to that level, but they've started to become more sensitive to the Palestinian cause, not just because of the Palestinians, but for the fact that the Zionists are intrinsically evil, for want of a better word, but more importantly, the drain of the resources that the Zionist body has on Western powers and their finances.
I mean, materially or historically, what similarities might you see between Kashmir and Palestine?
Well, we're both the longest pending, Kashmir maybe outdates it by a few months, but the longest pending issues on the United Nations agenda. We both face war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide, settler colonization, and demographic change. It's not just the people that have similarities or the causes, or for that matter, the occupation and the oppression. Even the oppressors themselves have similarities. The Zionists and Hindutva both have the vision of a pan-nation stretching beyond their own borders. The Hindus believe, particularly the right-wing radical Hindus, they believe in Hindutva, Akhand Bharat, a pan-Hindu nation that stretches beyond the borders of India, beyond the borders of Bangladesh, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, all the way up to Saudi Arabia. Some of their literature calls the Holy Kaaba, the most sacred place for Muslims, as the Makeshwar Mahadev temple. I mean, that's the goal that they've set. Now, most people won't take that seriously, but they do take the Zionist entities seriously. And that's a problem, simply because, and it's an argument that I make, and people may challenge me on this, but I feel that the Zionists have failed where Hindutva has succeeded. You see, whatever Israel does, the people are aware of it. Let's leave the government bodies, let's leave the international community, even the media for a moment. The public understands and they recognize what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinian people, or for that matter, beyond their own borders. But nobody recognizes or understands or even sees what Hindutva does to the people of Kashmir, or for that matter, the Muslims and minorities inside India. So there is a similarity between the oppressors, the same way there is a similarity between the oppressed.
Would it be fair to say that both states subscribe to a kind of supremacist ideology?
Absolutely.
Like, what is at the core of that, would you?
Absolutely. You see, when it comes to Hindutva, they believe in being a superior race. They believe in the Aryan race, no different to what, for example, the Nazis believed in. And although I make comparisons between Hindutva and Zionists, the root of Hindutva stems from a fascist Germany. Their literature and even their leaders had an affinity to Hitler, Adolf Hitler. The literature that's been produced is reminiscent of Nazi Germany. Their uniform is similar to the Nazis. Their ideologies are similar to the Nazis. Even their salute is similar to the Nazis. Now, just because fascism died a death under the Germans doesn't mean that it wasn't reincarnated in India. The BJP, or rather their parent organization, the RSS, they were patient. It took them a century, but they were patient. And now the government is in their hands, the judiciary is in their hands, foreign affairs is in their hands, and the vision that they had of a pan-Hindu nation is now being implemented. You see, not all wars are fought with guns and tanks and aircraft missiles. Some of it is economic. If you look at what happened in Bangladesh after the uprising to oust Sheikh Hasina, the biggest problem that anybody had around the world, it was the Indians. They were the ones that had a problem with Sheikh Hasina being ousted. When the government of Malaysia made a statement in regards to Kashmir against Indian oppression, the Indians stopped buying palm oil. India is the largest purchaser of palm oil from Malaysia, and that put pressure on the Malaysians. The influence that India have had in the Maldives or the Mauritius, nobody understood why. And when the new Prime Minister, President Muizzu, made a statement against India, pretty soon after he had to retract it, and now he's becoming, he's having good relations with India. What was the purpose of India having a position, a military base, or for any kind of presence in Afghanistan? One of the first countries to recognize that they need to have better relations with Taliban. So when we talk about supremacy, it's a supremacy in a different form. It's 2.0, maybe even 3.0 if you want to really talk about that. That they want to not just influence their own people in terms of creating that radical right-wing movement and then creating an ethnic, for want of a better word, a Brahmanized community, a supremacist community just within their own borders. That is disturbing in itself. But the fact that they want to export that to the rest of the world, that becomes a problem for everybody, not just for the Muslims inside India or for Kashmiris.
I'm wondering if you can speak to how so often we hear Kashmir being referred to as a quote-unquote disputed territory. You hear the same often when there's discussion about Palestine. In your view, is there something problematic about that, or is that an accurate way of describing Kashmir?
Legally, and as we consider ourselves to be binding within the United Nations Security Council resolutions, it is a disputed territory between India and Pakistan. Of course, time grows, people evolve, and everybody has a different opinion. But irrespective of the language that we use, we have to recognize that it is the people's choice, the right to self-determination that has been given to every single human being on this planet. More importantly, to the people of Kashmir, written in the United Nations Security Councils, agreed upon by the government of India and the government of Pakistan. Now, the government of Pakistan are more than happy to offer the people the right to self-determination. Even being a disputed territory, they recognize it's a disputed territory. The issue comes always back to India, whether they recognize this as a problem or not. Now, to the international world, they'll say it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. When Pakistan wants to have a discussion with India in relation to Kashmir, India says it's an internal issue. And when Kashmiris want to negotiate with India, India says there is no issue at all. So it's the seriousness of the Indian government, and it doesn't matter whether it's the BJP or the Congress, they're two sides of the same coin, that they will never agree upon the fact that the people of Kashmir have a problem. They'll agree that there is a terrorism issue, and I agree there is a terrorism issue, terrorism committed by India. They'll talk about the economics, that there has been a dilapidation in infrastructure. I agree, but that's all been performed by the successive Indian governments. It has nothing to do with the core issue, which is the right to self-determination, because it is a disputed territory.
Could you speak to what happened in 2019 and the article that was supposed to protect, or to a certain extent protect, the right of self-determination?
So Article 370 and 35A, it was, in the words of some scholars, it was a lollipop to put into Kashmiris' mouth to keep them quiet about the ongoing atrocities, to let them know that, look, at least you have some form of security, your land is yours, your identity is yours. It still didn't really address the core agenda, which was the human rights violations and, of course, the denial of the self-determination. But the stripping away of Article 370 and 35A essentially absorbed Kashmir into mainland India, making it no different to any other state. Not only was that illegal by international standards in the United Nations, it was in contravention against our own constitution. And to the extent that India had to amend their own constitution to fiddle around with ours. Now, just that special status that Kashmir had was temporary, pending a plebiscite, pending a referendum for the people. That's been stripped away. The situation we're in now is that the land is up for grabs. Anybody can buy that land. So the moment you have non-Kashmiris buying up land, that is the definition of demographic change and settler colonization. It's not always by the bullets or by tanks and, as I mentioned, by warfare. Sometimes it's just by changing the constitution. And again, we have to remember, it's not just an internal constitution that India have fiddled around with. It is the Security Council resolutions that they are in contravention of, the Geneva Conventions, the ICC and the ICJ. So it's drastic measures like this that push Kashmiris to the wall, which begs the question, why isn't anybody intervening, particularly the international world? When we're seeing the same way that we've seen genocide being performed in Palestine, we're now seeing settler colonization and demographic change being performed in Kashmir.
So a moment ago we were talking about the ideological similarities between the state of India and the Israeli state. I'm wondering if there's actual collaboration or work being done between these countries, specifically as concerns the oppression of distinct peoples.
It's funny you should mention this, and it's an excellent question, because if we go back to the birth of India, India were the first, a country, I won't say the first country, but in the south, they were the first country to recognize the Palestinian statehood and recognize, this is back in the 40s and 50s, they were against Israel. But behind the scenes, the relationship between India and Israel stretches far, far back, to the extent that when when India had a war with China, the Indian government, or the Indian Prime Minister of the day requested weapons from Israel to fight China. And while in the Security Council, they were advocating for Palestinians and against the Israeli occupation of Palestine. What they show, there's a phrase, that they show one thing to the world, and behind the scenes they're completely different. They created this persona of being anti-colonial, anti-imperial, because of their relationship or lack of with the British Raj at the time. But the entire time, they've always wanted the supremacist ideology to succeed. They've wanted to create that pan-Hindu nation. And with that, after the demise of the Nazis, they modeled themselves around Zionism, of how to create their own nations, how to occupy a people, to the extent that India have been one of the largest, if not the largest, weapons importer of Israel in the world. They train each other in modern warfare. They travel to each other's countries, be it their bureaucrats or the military, to educate themselves in different ways of, we'll call it oppression, they'll call it management of terrorism. So there is an understanding, not just an understanding, an active relationship between the Zionists and Hindutva to not just how to manage oppression and occupation, but how to suppress it and blindside the international community so that they don't speak about it or act against it. We've seen the violence that the Zionists have performed in not just Palestine, but even in Lebanon, in Jordan, and all the other surrounding areas. We've seen the assassinations that the Zionists have performed, not just in Palestine, but outside the territory. That's exactly what the Indians are doing. They're modeling themselves, and they're doing it more successfully than the Israelis, because nobody talks about it, nobody sees it, nobody understands it, and nobody speaks about it. The assassinations inside Pakistan, the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh activist in Canada, the attempted assassination of Sikhs in New York, the spies caught in Pakistan, Kulbhushan Yadav, the spies caught in Qatar, the spies caught in Germany. I mean, the list is endless, but nobody speaks about it.
I mean, is there an element of Western complicity in that?
You know, post 9/11, I argue that the war on terror, or rather the war on Islam, was outsourced to India because the West couldn't really compete against China through any other way. The closest ally that they could have had and created was India. It's come to a point where India have strengthened themselves so much that they no longer take dictation or direction from the West. Recently, Jaishankar, who is the Minister of External Affairs for India, in Washington, I believe, when somebody asked him why India doesn't sanction Russia in relation to the crude oil, he said, that's none of our business. That's your problem. That's a European problem. Don't impose your problems on us. There was a time where that was impossible to think of, that the Indian government would say such a thing. But the power that they have now is that they are dictating their own terms. They are creating their own policies, irrespective of what the Western powers believe. But there is still alignment in Western ideology and Indian ideology, which is, number one, eliminating the Muslim identity. That is the way that we see it. Suppressing the Muslim vote and creating your own supremacist state. That works for the Western powers. And in the same way it works for India, it doesn't, of course, work for those countries that are surrounding India that feel the wrath of Indian supremacy and post-colonial, the way that they perform post-colonialism. That's a problem. So when we talk about complicity of the West, I think there is, but I think it's gotten out of hand of the West. They don't control that as much as we'd like to think, but they don't rein it in either.
To your point on Muslim identity, I'd like to just speak a little bit about Islam, because there's also that commonality, that these states are also attacking Islam and what they're doing. And I'm wondering, maybe this is a bit of a philosophical question, whether you can comment on whether these states see Islam because of, for example, in how it promotes certain kinds of love and community and forms of justice, whether they see Islam as a quote-unquote threat, and that is part of why they act as they do.
I think, I'm going to refer back to 9/11. When George Bush said God spoke to him to go to war, Tony Blair said God spoke to him as well to go to war. The war on Islam is not just because we're Muslims. I think it also stems from the fact that the people that believe themselves to be Orthodox Christians or maybe not Orthodox Jews, but they have, even in their own literature, they believe in the end of times, they believe in the rise of a savior or the return of Jesus, peace be upon him. And I think that they believe that they are the chosen people, the way that the Zionists believe they are the chosen people. And Islam is a threat to that. Islam is a threat to the new world order that they want to build. Now, they may feel, and I can't imagine that they believe that they are evil. They feel that they are righteous and just people. We believe that, of course, they are not. But within their own minds, that is what they feel, that they are the righteous. And the problem with the righteous, not those that believe in justice, but those that are self-righteous, is that they believe everybody else is wrong, and therefore that cannot be compatible with our beliefs. Whereas Islam is different. Islam believes that we're here in Turkey, where everybody is compatible with one another. It doesn't matter what religion you are. And in the same way, Islam believes that it doesn't matter what religion you come from, what caste, what creed, what color, we can all live in a society, a pluralistic society. The problem with Western powers, or rather the Western philosophy and the way they interpret religion, is that it's my way or the highway. I'm right, and therefore everybody else must be wrong. They can't believe that you're right doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It can mean we can both be right at the same time. And that's where I feel the war is. The war on Islam is one that accommodates everybody. And that's why they don't necessarily want to let Muslims succeed, because it would mean, in their philosophy, in their ideology, that they would be lesser people, which is untrue, because we've seen in Islamic history of how just because there were Muslim rulers didn't mean that non-Muslims didn't have positions of power. And I think that is an understanding that maybe as Muslims we need to impart on the West, that we are not a threat to you, and if anything, we are your salvation and we are your success. If you're facing problems in your communities, be it with violence, be it with drugs, alcohol, with whatever it may be, there is a solution. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. In fact, Paul, we can even talk about how a lot of the laws, particularly I'm from the UK, a lot of the laws in the UK are compatible with Islam. I mean, the Western powers in, let's say, the United States and the United Kingdom believe that Sharia law is a threat to them, without understanding that most of your laws come from religious texts which aren't too dissimilar to Sharia law. Now, if they, for want of a better word, bastardize their own religion and their own laws. That's not my fault and my problem. Christianity, for example, believes that you should not eat from the swine, from the flesh from the swine. Islam believes in the same thing. Just because they do doesn't make it right. So essentially they are going against their own rules, their own laws, their own religion to satisfy their own, what we say, nafs, their own desires. The difference between that and us is that we aren't animals, we don't fulfill our own desires, we fulfill what is commanded upon us, and wherever there is allowance for us to have our own successes and our own understandings of religion, we're free to do so. And that's a threat, because what they call rigidity, we call having strength in our faith, firm in our religion.
Absolutely. That's why I say quote-unquote threat, because I see Islam as allowing for this plurality. Absolutely. But here they are constantly trying to promote, if you will, this kind of exclusivity, right, as you put it, our way or the highway. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the erasure of Muslim identity in Kashmir. What are some of the key ways that, or perhaps what are the most troubling manifestations of this?
The traditional clothes that our people wear, it's called a faran. It's a very large cloak that covers the body. It's, of course, for our own modesty, but it's also very traditional. It's a traditional Kashmiri attire. There was a point in time where the Indian government banned it within government offices because it didn't conform to the secular India. Now, they call it secular India, but we know very well it's not secularism that they have a problem, or rather secularism that they're trying to promote and force Kashmiris to adopt. Now, even within that language in itself, why are you trying to force me to adopt something that you believe in? If you believe that you are a secular nation, the world's largest democracy, where are my democratic rights? The religious angle also stems into the fact that a lot of the schools used to do morning prayers, and there were Islamic Muslim prayers in the morning. They've been erased. I'm starting to hear from the ground that they're starting to sing the Hindu hymns. The history that was taught in Kashmir is now being replaced with Hindu mythology. I use mythology on purpose because it's still mythology. The adhan, the call to prayer that was made from loudspeakers in the mosques, then that's now being clamped down on. Initially, it was first reduce the volume of those speakers that were calling people to prayer, to the extent that now they're being eliminated completely. Just a couple of months ago, not even a couple of months ago, my mistake, a couple of weeks ago, during the month of Ramadan, 2 imams from a mosque were kidnapped in the middle of the night before the prayers, the night prayers, for no reason. Some of these mosques are being turned into Hindu temples, into mandirs. The scarf is being demonized. People that are wearing traditional Islamic clothing, the scarf, or even for that matter, the niqab, the face covering, they're being demonized, they're being arrested. There was, during the month of Ramadan, I don't even want to go into the history side of this, I'm just going to talk about recent events. During the month of Ramadan, some females in Kashmir were distributing literature about Islam. It's the month of Ramadan, people should learn about the religion. That was being blocked. They were detained from and stopped from doing so. The literature was removed. I mean, to what extent? What is the end game here? Now, people may say these are random events that are happening, but when you look at it over a period of time, of how mosques are being turned into mandirs, how people's scarves are being slowly being reduced into nothing, despite them wanting to do so. I mean, it's still a choice in Kashmir. There's no compulsion to do it, but those women that used to do it are now feeling threatened from doing it at all. The introduction of alcohol and drugs. I want to mention this. It's very important because the same thing happened in Punjab, the Khalistan movement, that they wanted a separate state from India. The way that India broke the back of that movement was by introducing drugs, alcohol and pornography. And we know, I think it's Salahuddin Ayyubi that said that if you want to reduce a society into nothing and to destroy a society, you introduce drugs, alcohol and pornography into them. And that's what's happening inside Kashmir. The introduction of alcohol. I remember a time where there was only one place and it was very secluded and hardly anybody knew about it, and it was mostly for tourists. Now, just openly alcohol is being distributed. Drugs, nearly on every corner. Now you're seeing not just soft drugs like marijuana, but hard drugs like heroin, that is the needles that are being distributed to people, and you can see those things on the streets, where children, going to schools are seeing these things. The introduction of concerts. Now you may say, what's wrong with a concert? But when you have naked women dancing in those concerts next to nothing, wearing next to nothing, that's a problem. When you have these videos and photography that is being pushed into schools and onto social media, specifically for children, that's a problem. So they're breaking the back of our society by de-Islamizing. It's not just about demonizing the religion, it's also about de-Islamizing the people by introducing a new form of Islam to them. Now, it doesn't matter what form of Islam is being performed inside Kashmir or how people identify themselves. That's not the problem. The problem is when Narendra Modi starts talking about religion and teaches the people of Kashmir what their religion should be and how they should, what Islam should be for them. That's a problem. How can I consider Narendra Modi as my sheikh, my ustaz, my scholar? Are we really going? Are we really at a time where the Muslim world is going to allow an oppressor, a subjugator, a war criminal, an ethnic cleanser, somebody who was recognized as the butcher of Gujarat, who was banned from traveling to the UK and the US? We're now going to tolerate somebody like that, going to dictate terms to Kashmiris of how they should act and perform their religious obligations.
I feel it's a very serious kind of Islamophobia that recalls the kind that we saw in the immediate years, post 9/11 years, where both liberal and conservative media were peddling this rhetoric about how the Islamic world needs to be saved. And
they were the saviors somehow.
Right, exactly.
Post 9/11, it's the outsourcing of the war on Islam, what they call the war on terror. And India keep on reintroducing the term of terrorism to invoke the memories of 9/11, to make sure that they are not bound by any international laws. The same way that the United States committed numerous amounts of crimes, but just because they did it out of their jurisdiction, for example, Guantanamo, they weren't liable to international courts.
Yes. In terms of resistance, whether that's being done, as we're seeing in the Palestinian solidarity movement, through or with the help of social media or otherwise, could you speak to what you find is particularly effective in contesting these supremacist states like Israel and India?
Resistance comes in many forms, and we advocate intellectual resistance, the academic resistance. That's extremely important, because if literature doesn't exist, then how are we going to reach people? But at the same time, when you're left with no other option, when nations or ideologies like Hindutva and Zionism, they limit people's opportunities to speak, to think, to write. I mean, you can look at what's happening with social media. How many Palestinian voices are you actually hearing from Palestine? Because they're all being suppressed or they're being killed. Journalists that were assassinated in Palestine. In the same way, India does exactly the same thing. Everything is monitored. Paul, I'm not joking. Everything is monitored. Every social media, every WhatsApp, every telephone call, every note that's being taken, every email, even the landlines, no matter what you do inside Indian occupied Kashmir, the Indian government knows about it. It's only a matter of time before they start knowing exactly what's in our brains as well. People are too afraid to speak. People are too afraid to even communicate with one another about events that have happened. They can't even mourn. My family members can no longer speak to me because they're afraid of being locked up or in jail. Something happened recently during the month of Ramadan, and the Indian news channel reported something about myself. The next day, my family members were taken away and interrogated and beaten and tortured. I only found out about it through a third source, not even a secondary source, from a tertiary source, because they were too afraid to let me know what had happened to them. So these are realities that we're facing every single day. Now, such people either do two things. Either they write about it, they speak about it, which of course they can't do anymore because the suppression is unreal. The suffocation is unprecedented. And finally, what happens is people are forced to pick up arms and resist in the last way that they know how, because there is no other way to do it. And the success rate isn't the problem. The real question is talking about why these people are taking up arms. It doesn't matter that the fact that the Indian government called them terrorists. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. We know this. Nelson Mandela, until very, I guess it was the late 90s, even early 2000s, I think a CIA report was declassified where they said that he was still considered to be a terrorist. Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time of the United Kingdom, considered him to be a terrorist. And just within a few years, he was considered to be till now, and maybe into the future, considered to be the leading authority on resistance and righteousness. But we are still perceived to be as terrorists. And what is it that we're fighting for? Where is it that we're fighting? These are important questions because we don't take the war to mainland India. Kashmiris haven't taken the war to civilians. They are within their realms, defending their honor, defending the honor of their women, defending their land, defending their property, defending their identity, and most importantly, defending their religious identity, the Muslim identity. That's what the war is on, and that's what we're trying to defend. So the people that are inside Kashmir using arms, they're not using it against civilians, they're using it against an army that is armed to the teeth. I mean, there's statistics that people may want to understand is that 1 military person to every 10 civilians. And if you consider a military person, what kind of weapons they have on them, a pistol, an AK-47, grenades, stun, whatever it may be, they could kill Kashmiris 10 times over. And we've seen the genocide that's happened in Kashmir from 1947 till now, the atrocities that have happened, the killings, the blindings, the rapes, the torture, the enforced disappearances, the mass graves, the human shields that we've seen, innumerable. And Kashmiris, anytime that we attempt to resist, knowing full well that our success is going to be very limited, the lifespan of somebody that goes and tries to fight isn't long, weeks, if not months, and maybe weeks. But they resist anyway, because they have been given no other avenue to dissent, nothing whatsoever. And anybody that speaks, for example, somebody like myself, is considered to be a terrorist, a modern-day terrorist, wearing a suit and tie that advocates for peace, that advocates for the resolution of the Kashmir conflict according to United Nations Security Council resolutions. Not an out-of-the-box thinking, not an out-of-the-box solution, but according to the United Nations, is also perceived to be a terrorist and charged under terror laws inside India. It's a joke.
It's unbelievably bizarre. It's upsetting and so bizarre. It's almost like they're trying to create a discourse,
Absolutely. It's the maintenance of their own hegemony in the region.
Right, exactly. I mean, thank you so much for this most illuminating discussion. And I'm just wondering, before we end, if there's any final observations or thoughts you'd like to share.
Most importantly, Kashmiris have been at the forefront of trying to defend the Muslim identity for the longest time. Whether people recognize that or not is not a problem. We make those sacrifices for ourselves. But it's also important to know that Kashmiris sacrifice themselves for the Palestinians as well. Many years ago, there was, as usual, the Zionists performed an atrocity in Palestine. And I remember this vividly because everywhere people were in uproar. Every single country, people came to the streets to protest. One person was killed protesting for the people of Palestine. That person was a Kashmiri. We stand in solidarity with the Palestinians in any shape or form. We lend our support to them in any shape or form. And we know that the Palestinians feel the same way, although they may not be able to speak about it as freely as they want to. I ask the people that watch this show, that support the Palestinians, to recognize that the Palestinians and the Kashmiris are the same. When we people, the oppressed, recognize ourselves as one, what stops everybody else from also adopting the Kashmiri cause as their own?